The first Waldensian attack on the church is that the priests have no authority. We should not accept the authority of priests. We should accept only the authority of exemplary Christians. The second one was the denial of purgatory. And we already talked a bit about the birth of purgatory in the 12th century. And the Waldensians correctly identify purgatory as an entirely bourgeois creation, as a way in which the rich could have their cake and eat it too, meaning that they could accumulate wealth and that they could still escape the fires of hell by doing a few pious deeds, by buying masses, by, in a sense, engaging in some practices which come into being only in the 12th century. Purgatory is really an invention of the 12th century. We know the great book by Jacques Le Goff entitled La Naissance du Purgatoire, The Birth of Purgatory, which tells us how purgatory is constructed. And it is, of course, the creation of an intermediary place between heaven and hell, in which now people can escape and wait for liberation or entry into heaven. And you can buy that entry into heaven with money. You can negotiate for your salvation. Bourgeois will do this. They will negotiate for the salvation by buying masses, by paying people to go on crusades for them, by paying people to go on pilgrimage for them, by making donations to the poor, very ritualized and formulaic donations, but those that in a sense are ways of bargaining for salvation. You don't really have to be a good Christian now because, well, if you have money, you can now purchase your way into heaven, which is in many respects a denial of the Christian ideal of apostolic poverty. So the second thing that the Waldensians does is to deny the idea of purgatory. And finally, they embrace a radical evangelical morality. That is to say that those who engage in this religion, and that is, by the way, the case of all small heresies, that is, that the heretics who embrace this belief are taking extraordinary risk. They are placing their lives and wealth in great danger. So therefore, they are truly committed people. There is something in history which historians sometimes fail to take into account, which is the deep passions, the abiding passions and commitment that some people have for their beliefs. And, you know, I am a social historian and I sometimes ignore the importance of these elements in the making of history. There are people who will do irrational things because they believe in them. And that is a force which is very difficult to pin down as a historian. It's the same as leadership or charisma. How you pin it down? How do you explain it? So by adopting a kind of radical evangelical morality, the Waldensians, of course, preached by example. These are people who live the life they preach, who live in poverty, who go out, who give the consolatum, the kind of only sacraments that the Waldensians have, the consolation of entering into this deep-seated belief in apostolic poverty, in the denial of the world, in the denial of the authority of the church to determine who you are. In some respects, these are forerunners of the great Protestant Reformation of the 16th century. It is a kind of priesthood of oneself. You live your life as a Christian, as a true Christian, and then there you are. The Waldensians, of course, will be persecuted in the 13th century, will be ferreted out by the Inquisition, as we shall see in the next lecture, but will survive as an active force and will become intertwined with all the heretical groups later on, with the radical Fraticelli, with the radical Franciscans, with some of the flagellants, to create a kind of latent but always present kind of underground anti-establishment, anti-Christian, not anti-Christian because they think of themselves as a true Christian, but anti-church groups throughout Western society, which will create a kind of revolutionary ferment from which millenarian movements will draw a good number of their followers. From the Waldensians we shift to the Cathars, and the Cathars is a very different kettle of fish. Because the truth of the matter is that though I am calling the Cathars, or Catharism, or the Albigensian heresy, as they were called in the late 12th and early 13th century, a Christian heresy, the truth of the matter, of course, is that Catharism was a very different religion from Christianity, was not really a Christian heresy, but a religion into itself. Catharism has very ancient roots. It goes back to the preaching of Manis or Mani, again another one of those Persian, Iranian thinkers in the early centuries of Christianity, who was a dualist. He was a dualist. He posited, in some ways following from Zoroaster, a world divided between two opposing forces. One, a forces of good and the spirit and light. Two, the forces of matter and evil and darkness. And these two forces are in continuous struggle one with the other. I cannot even begin to tell you how extraordinarily important Manichaeism, that split between the body and the spirit, is in the Western tradition. It is something that we have inherited and that we almost unconsciously feel to this very day, the tremendous importance of the Manichaean dualism. Dualism plays an extraordinary role not only in religion, but also in our philosophical outlook. Perhaps the greatest of all church fathers, Augustine of Hippo, in the late 4th and early 5th century, spent a time before his conversion to Christianity, actually before his conversion to Neoplatonism and then to Christianity, as a Manichaean. And it was only meeting a Manichaean elder who was not very bright that convinced him that this was not the way to go. But Manichaeism provided a very good explanation for the existence of evil, one of the most troubling questions within religion and certainly within Christianity. That is to say, if there is a God who is good and fair and loves mankind, from where does evil come? Where is the origin of evil? Because of course you cannot attribute evil to God. Otherwise, what kind of a God is this that allows all this evil to exist? And therefore Manichaean was very attractive. There is a Manichaean religious experience or practices which we call also the Bogomil religion in the east of Europe, and it makes its way slowly to northern Italy and then to southern France. And Catharism prospered tremendously in southern France for many reasons. By the way, Catharism is the name of the Cathars, and the Cathars are the pure ones, that is to say, the ones who withdraw from the world. They don't eat animal products. They refrain from sex. They live pure lives as a way of, in a sense, withdrawing from the world and coming close to that one of the dualist elements, the elements of the good, the elements of light, of the spirit, to be as spiritual as possible, to escape the body conceived as a prison. But they did not insist, which is what makes this religion so attractive, they did not insist that everybody lives like this. You could, in some respects, lead a normal life. And if you lead a normal life, but you believe in the Cathars and cooperate with the Cathars and attend their services, then you might also be saved. You might escape from the oppressions of the world. So that the Cathars rejected all sexuality and procreation. No meat, no eggs, no milk, no cheese. In a sense, it's a way in which you escape the world. You become pure. Now, sort of pinning down Cathars' beliefs is very difficult, because what we know about the Cathars, we know essentially through mostly the texts of the enemies of the Cathars. And this is something that I was saying on the first lecture. That is to say that we are reading hostile accounts of Cathar beliefs. There are several Cathars documents, and I can read from you because I have them with me here. although that might not be necessary. There are some Qatar texts which show some of the ideas of the Qatars, but essentially most of the information we have about the Qatars is from hostile sources, from inquisitorial trials, from attacks against the religion. We know that the Qatars have certain sets of beliefs. We know that the Qatars believe that the world, since the world is matter, that the world was made not by God, but by Satan. This is a way in which Christianity serves as an overlay over Manichaean beliefs which dated back almost to the beginnings of Christianity. So in a sense, you impose certain Christian terminology over ancient beliefs. The world is made by Satan. God, in her or its, in a sense, love for mankind,